ሰላም ጤና ይስጥልኝ። እንኳን በድጋሚ መጣችሁ። ዛሬ የምንገኘው ከዶክተር ተፈራ ጋር ነው። የግራድ ስኩል ኢንተርቪው ሲሪስ ላይ ነው የምንገኘው። ስለ ሜንተርሺፕ፣ ስለ አፕሊኬሽን ቲፖች፣ ጀነራል የሆነ ፊድባኮችን ከዶክተር ተፈራ እንሰማለን። በጣም ብዙ ዓመት ኤክስፔሪየንስ ያለው ሰው ስለሆነ አይ ቲንክ this will be one of the very helpful interviews and ዶክተር ተፈራ በጣም እናመሰግናለን ጊዜህን አለ ቢዚ ስኬጁል ላይ ሰጥተህ ከኛ ጋር ዛሬ ለማውራት እና ለብዙ ሰው የሚጠቅም tips ለመስጠት ፈቃደኛ ስለሆንክ so welcome. Thank you መጀመሪያ ላይ.
Welcome, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. So let's start from you. What do you do? Your academic background, your professional background, what do you do right now? ሚለውን ሰፋ አድርገህ ስለአንተ ንገረን so people know who they're speaking with or who they're listening from.
So I was born in Ethiopia and grew up in the States. I did high school, undergrad in the US. I have 3 undergraduate degree in mathematics, biochemistry, and chemistry. So I didn't know. That shows you not because I'm smart. It only shows you I didn't know what I was doing, right? So I tried to do everything I could. And then I got an advice from family member to be a doctor, like my uncles. So I went to medical school to do an MD, PhD program at that time called University of Maryland. University of Medicine and Dentistry of New Jersey at that time, right? So I think now it's called Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital. It's in Brunswick and around Piscataway area. So I did my MD degree, and when time came to do residency, I was disenchanted with patient care. So I went and finished my PhD in epidemiology and start doing a lot of pharmaceutical work right after school in terms of research, doing pharmaceutical drug discovery work. And then I missed public health. I came back, did a master's in public health leadership, and started my basically public health implementation career. So I did about 3 years of program implementation across New Jersey, which expanded to Pennsylvania a little bit, in actually drug users harm reduction program. There was a CDC funded program that I did for about 3 years, and then went back to academia. I became assistant professor of public health at Rutgers University School of Public Health. I taught a lot of graduate students, doctoral and master students, and then some undergrad, largely focusing on global health, epidemiology, and research methods. I did that for about, I think, 5-7 years. And then I have this tendency to change careers every 5 or so years. So I went back to pharma. And then this time I went to do epidemiology work purely in clinical trials, again, focusing on the patient aspect of pharma. And then I did that for a few years, went back to consulting. I became a consultant across pharmaceutical companies and largely working with leaders in Fortune 500 companies, developing leadership in public health and pharma. And then in 2017, McKinsey came knocking and they said, we need you to come back to Ethiopia to do some work for us in the Ethiopia office, largely focusing on leadership development, because at that time, I think by 2018, the country was moving to a new direction. So I came to help out on that aspect. Unfortunately, COVID hit. But for me, at least, luckily, all my training in global health and epidemiology were the handy skill that I think the Ministry of Health in the country needed at that time. So as a McKinsey, I stayed in Ethiopia during COVID and did a lot of mitigation and risk reduction work with the ministry at the Ministry of Health. Subsequently left McKinsey, and I was in the decision mode to go back to the States where I've lived for 3 decades. So stay in Ethiopia where I thought I might have a little more impact than other places. So I stayed behind. We opened Adwa Partners consultancy firm in Ethiopia. It's an implementation firm largely focusing, developing leaders and helping most healthcare workers, physicians and nurses, and continuous professional development. So that's what I've been doing for the past 2 years. So right now, I do deliver a lot of leadership courses in Ethiopia, including those aspirants of residency programs in the US. That's what I've been doing in short, I guess.
That's a very, very impressive journey. I mean, what have you not done, and which sector have you not been in? That's very impressive, and I think that's why I really wanted you to come to this and talk to a lot of physicians, because they should be able to know there are so many different opportunities and there are so many different paths, and you can do it all. I think you're a good example of that. You've done pharma, you've done consultancy, you've done academia. You are now running your own organization, so you've been involved in the ministry. You have a whole view of the healthcare system, I think, and it's very impressive. But out of all of this, which one are you really passionate about? And I know you do a lot of leadership and mentorship, so I want you to also kind of like connect it with the mentorship service, not services, the mentorship actually that you provide. I would also want others to know that you're one of my mentors, and I've learned a lot from you. So what are your passions out of all of these things you've done? What stands out for you? And then tie that into the leadership and mentorship work that you do.
I was a little kid and a nerd at that time, when I was younger. So naturally, I focused on science and mathematics, and I thought that was the way to change and have an impact. But when I started working in public health, this social causes drove me to leave medicine and focus on doing research, particularly public health research. And that's where my heart was until I went to do a leadership program at Harvard, the T-Chan School of Public Health, and I learned in a 1 year program, right? I learned so much, and I realized you could do one or two things, right? You could try to do everything yourself, or you can multiply yourself through other people and do a lot together, right? So I started thinking about if I can share what I know and help the people develop into what they want to become. So the more of us are around, the better we can have an impact, rather than I am doing it alone, or a few people are doing it alone. So this is what drove me to go into leadership. Even in pharma, one of the things I did was that bringing students from the School of Public Health programs that are, with the health outcome research students, or epidemiology students, or health policy students, bring them and make sure the pharmaceutical company became more of population-driven than profit-driven alone, right? So that was where my passion came about. And as I was going through it, I have this proclivity to hire physicians. Even in my office, there are more physicians and healthcare workers than anything else, right? Even if they do something else, I hire them because I think I have a bias of thinking people who go through medical school have gone through the hardship, right? They are teachable people. That's how I believe. Most of the physicians that I know, all of them are teachable. It's not like one unique field where you learn engineering alone or something. The medicine teaches you a lot about people, about clinical, diagnostics, about instruments, about research. It teaches you so much. You have to be different. So I figured if I hire those people, I can train them in whatever skills that I have and have an impact. So this is where the leadership aspect comes in. Even after I came back to Ethiopia, when I had opportunity to do a lot of other things, I focus on capacity building, trying to develop the next level of leaders so that they can think differently, they can have a different impact. Not to say that people who, our fathers and grandfathers did it wrong, but we are doing it a bit differently, right? So we need to have that thinking, that courage, so that people could have, okay, you've done it this way, now we're thinking to do it a little differently, right? Doesn't mean they're wrong, they didn't contribute, but we're doing it differently, we're impacting different, we are living in a different era. So this is where my focus on leadership is. So when I work in Ethiopia now across public sectors or private sectors, I encourage young leaders to be courageous in the way they impact their environment. You don't have to change the entire world, to change your neighborhood, change your house, change yourself, and then things will come and fall in line. So that's my thinking. This is why I believe in developing leaders. And you talked about, you and I, when we were talking when you were in Ethiopia, every time I try to encourage you to continue that, because I believed what you do, other than being a physician, that your impact, I'm sure, is multiplied many times in work that you've done and give in the community service you give, right? Those are the things that I think we need to focus on, right? We could do stuff for ourselves, but when we think outwards, what is the contribution that I make that could have the largest impact, right? This is how I think every day. What has, more likely to give me more impact, and I focus and I I gravitate towards studying leadership training and in motivating. Mentorship has been my passion, I think, in the past few years.
And I think it's much needed for the current healthcare workers and physicians in Ethiopia, because it's a very tough scenario that a lot of people are going through unemployment, or even if they're employed, a lot of people are not happy. So having this kind of guidance and leadership and mentorship is very important. So I will connect this to my next question. I would like us to explore about mentorship in detail, maybe in another segment, but just because I have you here and I cannot let you go without talking about mentorship and advising physicians, especially those that are like fresh graduates or still in medical school, there is a lot of misunderstanding and not knowing how to go about mentorship, how to seek out mentors, and what even that is, and how the relationship building is. So you can just tell us a little bit about, especially in terms of advising fresh graduates and medical school students, what mentorship is and how they should look for one, and what kind of relationship they can build.
Mentorship is one of those things that it is, I think, not new to the Ethiopian context, but what it is that people are not clearly defining what it is, right? We all, everybody has, without defining it, has someone who helped them through something, right? For me, mentorship started when I was a young kid in Utah, one of the only Black kids that were in the school, and I had no one, no family, nor anyone. I gravitated to people who I thought could help me, guide me through things, right? So it came from me to make them my mentors. It's not they came looking for me. And a lot of people think the mentor has to be kind enough to come to you and help you out. It could happen that way if there is another relationship that leads to it. But I think the essence of mentorship for me is the mentee who needs the guidance and know what they need, or at least the confusion that is in their head. They need to clarify that by having conversation with people, right? So when they do that, there are, I think, specific things I think that needs to be understood. One, as a mentee, you have to find the right people for you, right? Meaning, if you want to, for instance, start a small business and you want to have a mentor in starting a small business, there's no point for that person to have a conversation with the CEO of a company, right? Because that CEO who's been a CEO for 30 years is too far out from how to start a small business. What you need is someone who just did it in the past 5-10 years, has done a small business, and have gone through the contemporary challenges small business owners go through, right? So the same thing in academia. If you go to your professors that have been in academia or teaching in a university for 30, 40 years, you go ask them how to navigate the system, they're going to refer to what they remember and what they know. In their view, their perspective is entirely different and sometimes has no use for you. So what I think should happen is, if you are an intern, for instance, a resident going into residency program, you should start having conversation first the one senior year and then 2-3 years. It's people that are in the university doing residency all the way to recent graduates who completed residency. Because those are the people who could actually tell you, avoid this pothole, go this way, here's a short way to do it, right? So that doesn't exist in Ethiopia when you have conversation mentors. That's one. The second thing is, people don't realize, especially mentees, they have to do the interview of the mentor they selected. Just because, Dr. Tefera has a gray hair, he's done a lot, I want him to mentor me, is really, to me, absolutely nonsense, because you have to come and have a conversation with me, see even the way I talk, my approach, the way I interact with you, is the right tone of, thing that could motivate you. I might be too fast or too slow, too aggressive, to something. You need to set that up before you say, be my mentor, right? The other thing is, most people ask me about mentorship, like, I don't know where to find them. That's your role. One, LinkedIn is an amazing place to have conversation with people. I've never refused anyone who asked for, to link with me on LinkedIn or ask me a question and never responded. But what should happen is that try to find, where those people are going to be found. If there are conferences or meetings, attend those events. And at the end of it, have a conversation and be smart about the conversation. You don't go and say, can you be my mentor, please? That doesn't work. Ask them. People love to talk about themselves. Ask them, I was so surprised when you say XYZ. How did you do it? What was the challenge for you? The minute you say that, people are going to say, wow, yeah, this person is interested, and they want to hear what I have to say. And you can start building the rapport. This is when I say there are 5 phases for me in mentorship, right? The first one is what we call rapport building. First, you have to, I don't know about Marinho what you said, but rapport building is that you need to have that conversation that you will get motivated by this person, right? And as you're doing that, you need to see their behavior, because mentorship from the mentor, there is a huge sensitivity that's required, because some of the mentees are so vulnerable, right? And sometimes they end up in this infatuated passion about their mentor, and it always leads to something not productive. So you need to have, is this person sensitive enough to understand my challenges and keep it to themselves and actually guide me to be in the right place? So that rapport building is important. The other one is, once you have that conversation and you say, okay, this is the person that I want to be mentored by. The second is direction setting. You have to say, what is the direction that I want to go with this mentor? Is this about career? Is it about academia? Is it about my personal life? Is it about my career? So once you know which one you want, because you can't have one person do all of it. That's when people, she's the most amazing mentor, or he's the most amazing, he tells me everything. That's not possible. One person cannot do everything. You come to me and ask me about your family life, I might not be the right one, right? But if you come to ask me about leadership, about epidemiology, about medicine, about these things that I know, I'm sure I can help you. Even if I don't, I can connect you to the right people. So you need to have that direction, the right direction, and don't be afraid to have more than one mentor, right? Then once you set the direction, have a conversation in a progress setting, right? What is the expected cadence of meetings with the mentor, right? And if you set a meeting, show up. If you said, we're going to do this amount of time, in the next 6 months, I'm going to continue developing myself and to get into residency program. Follow that mentor's guidance, set timeline, show up, right? Don't make excuses. The excuses, if the mentor makes an excuse, okay, they're delivering services. But as a mentee, never make excuses. Show up all the time so that those people know that you're committed, right? So once you have then set the progress and start thinking, okay, when is the winding down happens, right? You can't rely on one person forever. Start saying, okay, I have gotten exactly what I want from, Megas. Then now I'm going to move into another mentor who's going to take me somewhere else, right? So make sure you wind down properly, appreciate, keep positive relationship with that person, and cross that bridge. Most of the time, what I find is that when people move on, the fifth step is the moving on, right? When they move on, they disappear, right? As we are working, when they feel like they've gotten exactly what they want, they disappear. What that creates is that the mentor is discouraged because they don't see your growth and satisfaction and your appreciation. There are people like everybody else, right? I want to be acknowledged for what I have contributed, what I felt I've contributed. So, and also for the mentee, they need to make sure they keep that relationship, because you disappear and 3 months later you come back and ask me to write your personal reference, right? Now, I can't say this person is committed because you did not go through the whole thing. So make sure when you move on, the mentor understands. They keep their schedule back to where they want. If I'm meeting you every Thursday at 2 p.m. and you don't show up for 2-3 Thursdays, you've wasted my time. I'm not going to have a good taste about your name when you come back. So make sure you say, listen, I am wrapping up this. I'm moving on to this thing. I really appreciate what you have done for me. And I was thinking, in the future, if I come back and I say hi to you, but our last day is going to be so-and-so. The mentor is going to say, yeah, absolutely. Then you can move on simply. So make sure you go through this general terms in terms of, having that relationship with the mentor. But above all, make sure you choose the right mentors, and you can have more than one mentor at a time. People think it's just one person. Not true. So try to create a diversity in your mentorship, have that clear goal setting right from the start. That's what I would say about mentoring.
That's actually very amazing and very comprehensive. You've said it well. Like, mentors are not there to do everything for you. So you need to have multiple ones. And at the same time, they're there to share their journey, and they're there to ask you questions so that you can come up with answers and kind of find out yourself. So you have to be ready to do the work. They're not there to give you answers or to just like tell you to go here and there. So that's actually very important. So thank you for that. So today, mostly what we were be talking about is about application, especially for Masters in Public Health applicants in the US. So let's start from the statement of purpose, because that's where I see a lot of people struggling, and I'm sure you've seen that in your mentoring sessions and in different scenarios. So give us some pointers on, like, especially for like Ethiopians, what they should do when they write their statement of purpose for US universities to get, not just to get admission, but to get scholarship, because the most important thing for us is getting scholarship. Most of us can get admissions. We're all brilliant and smart, but we have a problem when it comes to writing about ourselves or branding ourselves. So tell us a little bit about, from what you've noticed, things a lot of Ethiopian physicians can improve to get a good scholarship and admission to all the prestigious schools and the schools that they want.
It is interesting you asked that question. One of the work that we do here is actually helping young physicians who are interested in doing MPH. And from my finding, right, we did the first cohort of people that we were working with, and I think we have achieved success, huge success. But one of the things that I've learned over time is that for some reason, storytelling has gone out of our culture, right? We are people of storytellers. We never had libraries. People, my grandfather told me stories of what he heard from his grandfathers and so forth, right? And we've always been great storytellers about ourselves, about our community, about, our country and so forth. But what I found coming back to Ethiopia is that somehow that culture has been diluted with something, right? So because the reason I say that is most people, I would say 9 out of the 10 people I've met are poor storytellers about themselves. It's not even about making up story. It's about talking about yourself, right? And this is why people don't understand about Americans. A lot of people say Americans are cocky and they talk about themselves. That's because from high school, we've been told, who are you? What makes you different? Why are you special? So you rehearse it all your life, from childhood all the way to professional setting. You have to talk about yourself. And it's not about bragging or making up stuff, but what makes you interesting? What makes you special? It's a competitive world, as you said, especially for scholarship. So 1,000 people apply, and a tired graduate student is going through your application, and everyone has an amazing grade. Nothing makes you exceptional except the story you tell, right? This is it. I have been a student when I was medical school, a student admission body. When I was at faculty, I've gone through stuff. What we are interested in is seeing that character, that person with the drive, with the commitment, with the motivation, with the desire to come to our school and be a part of the student body, not only contribute and be successful in the classroom, but make our student body different and unique, right? So in order to do that, you have to have a unique story. So my experience has been, I ask, people, go right and come back, to tell me about yourself. They come back, they tell you the same thing. It seems like somebody printed out something and gave it to them. Why they want to be a doctor, why they want to do this, how they came from this neighborhood, or this kind of stuff, which is not a bad thing if it was unique, but it becomes so homogenized. Everyone has the same story. So my advice is, there are a couple of things people need to do. When you sit down to tell a story about yourself, it doesn't have to be this groundbreaking, amazing story that nobody had or that kind of stuff. It's not a movie you're writing. People who, when I was in school reading people's, personal statement or story, if I feel like it is exaggerated, doesn't make sense, they're out. You can tell, fake stories versus authentic stories. So first, have a self-reflection moment. Who am I? What is that? What kind of courage do I have to be vulnerable enough to talk about my story, right? So when I'll tell you about myself, when I was in the US, the story that I told was about my childhood when I was in Ethiopia, right? The kind of exposure during the Derg administration, what I have seen, the bad things I have seen. I was honest. It was not an easy thing, but I told that story to the extent that I know it. So people found that interesting to ask me more questions, right? How did you go through that and made it this far? And then I had a story, because it is not something that I made up. It's something that I was exposed to and I had experience with. So what I would tell people is that once you decide to write something, Don't worry about the quality of the language at this point or whether it makes sense, but have a self-reflection moment. What is that, the story that I'm comfortable with that I can tell? It requires, as I said, courage, because you have to be vulnerable enough to go back to your mind, to places that might not be comfortable for you. So once you do that, the next thing you have to do is that, what is my motivation for telling this story, right? You can't tell your story everywhere, whoever, listen to you. We tell the stories so that people say, wow, they're motivated with this thing. This is why they tell me this story. So remember your motivation. Just going to an MPH program or getting to the US schools is not the only motivation that should be outlined. You should have motivations that, what is that you want to do once you graduate from school or the rest of your life? What is the true motivation? It doesn't have to be, again, I want to make every Ethiopian holiday. It doesn't make sense, right? Or I want to change Africa. That makes no sense. Talk about exactly what matters to you. You could say, I have a sick family member that I want to look after, be with some knowledge. It doesn't matter. It's just the fact that you tell what you want to do, what your motivation is. So demonstrate that through your storytelling. Then when you sit down and write everything out, don't worry about, the quality of it, what it says, and how it sounds. Make sure that you share everything and then ask people. One of the things that one kid told me is that, I feel like I don't remember what I've been through the past 20-some years, she said, right? So that's because she was in high school, in Ethiopia, you finish high school, you compete to go to university, she competed, she got into medical school. The medical school years went by, she was just, all she knows is struggling, and came out, tried to do internship, and then residency, struggled. All she remembers is this fighting to survive, and she's forgotten things that happened to her, or things that matter. So I told her, this is where you can go ask people who know you. Ask your friends, ask your parents, ask family members, because they have moments that they've heard about you, whether it's really encouraging or really bad moment or whatever it is. They say, remember this happened to you and you overcame it this way. Remember this happened to you, this. So go back and ask them, what are those moments like, right? Then as soon as you remember those moments, then you have a story, right? Then the next thing is authenticity. Never make up stuff. Be authentic. Authentic stories are the ones that makes people start producing oxytocin and connect with you, right? The minute you tell that authentic story, people are like, I want to meet this person, right? So that's the moment that defines you from the rest of the applicants in the program. So you say, okay, here is my story. I want to tell it, and I'm going to tell it very clearly, concisely. Don't, make it extended story. Here's what happens. This is how it connects with my motivation, right? So that authenticity and what happened to you has to connect to the motivation that we talked about earlier. So when you do this, is people are going to say, okay, the whole story that I'm reading makes sense, right? Then, if sometimes when people write this statement of purpose, particularly, they forget they need to address a problem that they think they want to contribute towards, right? If you're saying, I want to work on public policy and public health, or epidemiology, or research in cardiovascular disease, whatever that you said when you start, make sure you address that and how you wish to contribute, right? If you have time and knowledge, talk about the current science or evidence, right? Or how the science is going, or how that science hasn't gotten to Ethiopia if you're coming back and work. Whatever it is, make sure you address that problem that you say you're going to be a part of. Obviously, one of the things that people need to know is you start with the draft. You have to edit endlessly until you find a story, that you're comfortable with. But more people are, at least adverse to is that they write one thing, they edit, they use some software to edit it, and they come back with a story that is all over the place. And because that tells me they have not looked at it more than twice, right? You need to edit it so many times to a point where for two reasons. One, to make sure it meets all the requirements. Two, it is your story that you're telling. Someone is going to ask you. You have to tell it in 3 different forms. One, you have to be able to tell the whole story if you're asked. Two, can you tell the story in a concise way, in a short way? And the third one is the elevator pitch, right? If you meet someone in the elevator and say, who are you? You have to be able to tell them interesting stuff about you so that they say, oh, yeah. Come tell me more, right? Then you will tell them who you are. But if you don't have the ability to tell your own story in those formats, people will know this rehearsed, it's not authentic, and you'll fall into a challenge. So storytelling is, I think, one of the most important skills in my leadership training. One of the first thing I teach people is about storytelling. When we say storytelling, it's talking about who you are, right? In whatever profession. I teach salespeople about storytelling. And when you think about it, it's right, what's important there, right? But you have to be able to connect to people. For me, storytelling is a means of communication that actually almost guarantees you to create a rapport and connection with people, right? So that's where I think one of the things that a lot of us need to work on, particularly in Ethiopia. And I think if you have to take classes, if you have to listen to talks about storytelling, I think I would encourage people to do that as they're thinking about writing their statement of purpose or personal statement as it is. I hope that was clear enough.
That was very clear. And I think everyone will resonate with this because you're kind of trying to show who you are through words. And you need to paint a picture of who you are, what you've done, what your experiences are, and what led you to this point where you're applying to the school. So they need to understand why you, like, why not another person? Why not another applicant? Why you? So that can only be answered with your unique stories and authentic stories. So that definitely was very helpful. So the second part of the application that I see people struggling with is the recommendation letters. How do you advise people to ask for recommendation letters? And what are some of the problems you've seen with recommendation letters when you were in admission office, seeing it being like, this is not good? Like, what were some of like the obvious reasons that some recommendation letters just don't work?
Yeah, a funny story. When I came to Ethiopia and asked people about where they get their letter of reference, and almost everyone told me our seniors would ask us to write it ourselves and then they sign it for us, right? And I was like, wow, that's a sad story, because now there's two stories there. One, this is the same individual who wrote their personal statement, not what. Now they're asked to write their own letter of reference, which is not going to be good, because based on the same knowledge, span of knowledge and this humility, almost pathological humility Ethiopians have, because we are, I don't know how humble we are. We can't even tell our own story and exaggerate it a little bit, not even say the facts, right? So I was just very disappointed. Like, so how are these people, getting into other programs? Because as you know, in the US, I don't know what my professors write or my recommenders write. I select them specifically based on the relationship that I have with them. I know exactly the level of engagement I have with that person, and I know what they will talk about, right? Because if it's my mentor who taught me how to be a great soccer player, that's the person I'm going to ask. If it's my mentor who taught me how to be a leader, that's the person I ask in leadership. If it's my boss that I'm asking, it's about my ethics, work ethics, and my dedication and so forth. So one of the things I think I would insist people remember to do in Ethiopia is that not to ask letter of reference just because somebody says yes, right? Because someone says, I'll write you one, it doesn't mean they'll write you the story that you want the other person want to hear. So the consistency is this. You have a body of a story, your own story, right? That you say, this is my personal statement or statement of purpose, and you wrote about yourself. That letter of reference has to speak about a part of that story, right? So if you say, I have done research when I was in medical school and public health research, and we did, distribution of disease among, ethnic minorities or something, or among women, among children, the person who writes you that has to be able to tap into that, because at the admissions office, we're creating a body of story about a human being, right? And that person's story has to align. If you say, I have done this, but there's no reference anywhere about everything you talked about in your personal statement, it doesn't matter how good that letter of reference is. It will have no value because it's not consistent with the story you're telling. So as you're thinking about who am I selecting, it's okay to have an old boss, a mentor, or even, a school teacher that when you were younger. It is all about your character and the kind of skill sets that you have, right? And how you would apply those skill sets in the program or in the school that you're going to. So as you're thinking about, make sure you select the right people who could actually talk about you in the right way. And ask them, right? Don't be say, please, Dr. Musikir, can you write me this? And you said, the person is too busy or too embarrassed to say no. They say yes, and they cut and paste and send it to you. I have seen, when I was in Rutgers University, I have seen a letter of reference where it was written for a guy and it says her and she so many times. That the person did not change anything. They just changed the name. So you don't want to be in that predicament. For me, it said more about the writer than the student. But it is too late for me, right, to do anything. So not to end up in that predicament, ask the person, would you write me a letter of reference? And then, would you write me a supportive one, right? If they say no, it's fine. It's better to know it then and go somewhere else than, please write me a supportive one. Because I'm not going to say, the Ethiopians, they're not going to say no to you. They're like, she. And then they copy and paste something. No, what you want is something that says about whatever you've done with that mentor or that person writes you clearly and identify your strengths that talks about your strength. If you know them well, then ask them. If I remind them, say, remember we did this research together. And if you remember, I was responsible for this part and I did this part, right? And then if you remember, we published it, I presented it in this. If you remember, I faced this challenge, but I overcame it this way. That leaves language for them to talk about. That's what schools want to see. They want to see this student came in, struggled initially, but they picked it up and performed at the end. They were one of the best, so-and-so. That's what they want. Everybody wants to see progress, not you were born there and you were like excellent person. Everyone says, okay, they came in, they work hard. Initially, even if they struggle, they succeeded. That's what we want. We're going to school to learn and struggle and make it through. So focus on people who say those things about you. The other thing is, don't accept if people say this superlative words. Musikir was one of the best students. And what? Or Musikir was one of the most strongest worker. Tell me a story, right? Why do you think she's the best student? Why do you think she was a great employee? Why do you think she was a great leader? We need examples, right? So really, as it was funny when I told you initially about Ethiopians being asked to write their own. In fact, if you ask me, I wish my teachers asked me, my mentor asked me to write about myself, right? Ethiopians, when you get that chance, then write the most amazing, authentic story that specifies and points to that statement of purpose you wrote and give it to them, right? Put a story in it, right? You embarrass them not to say no to that story, because if they said, you write it, yes, write absolutely fantastic stuff about yourself. Leave the humbleness and embarrassment or, well, what would they say if I said I'm great for some other time. Write about you everything, the whole truth, but then nothing the truth. Write it all and give it to them and have them sign it. So, this letter of reference, make sure you ask the right people who know you. It is better that they write one small, fantastic something about you than they say pages and pages of superlative things that has no meaning. So remind them, this is your life. This is your story. Remind them what you want them to write. They are humans. Like for me, I mentored over 1,000 students. I don't remember everyone. They are jumpers. Even I don't remember the name. But when they come back to ask me, I say, remind me when you first came. Remind me what we did together. I'm taking note as students tell me, right? Because then it will jog my memory and like, oh yes, that student who was like so nervous initially now, and then she became so good at presenting, right? That's a story for me to tell. So make sure you go actively ask and then do it early. I've seen so many students really disappointed with the mentors that they said they would write them. I couldn't find them, or she said no, they don't never pick up their phone up. Yeah, be ahead. It's not their timeline, it's your timeline. You should have it done way in advance, right? So those are the things I would recommend people pay attention to.
Thank you so much for telling us about how to write the recommendation letters, even if we are writing it them ourselves, because I see that problem a lot. People, when even they're given the chance to talk about themselves, they don't write nice things. Like they can make it much, much better, because this is your chance to actually say good stuff that your recommender potentially might forget or something. So, and also how you said we need to remind them the points that they need to highlight. That's very important, because as you say, they might forget, or they might not know that it's directly related to this program or something. So it's very good to guide them and make sure they write the things that we want them to write. So my next question is about resume, because that's where I see a lot of people struggle too. One of the essential part of a graduate school application is their resume. So what are your tips, and what is common mistakes that you see when you read a grad school application?
Luckily, one of the things I see from at least Ethiopian medical graduate is it's not the lack of things they put in a resume. It's more sometimes it's the sequence. A resume tells another part of a story about you, right? So where do you start? There's no point about I went to so and so prestigious elementary school. It's not relevant. Even your high school is not relevant, right? What is relevant is that if you have your story about who you are, where you came from, is in a personal statement part of it. Start where college you graduated from, and then what activities did you do in school, right? There are like student activities, social groups, so whatever, community service. You need to reflect that aspect of it. People forget. And then when I start asking him, have you done anything? They'll tell me 10 things. And I'm like, you could have put those 3 things in there, because that's part of what defines you as an active person who started leadership at a young age. The term, most people make this mistake. So they put words like communication skill, leadership skill, right? These are not skills that you list, and just because you list them, you have it. You have to prove to me when you say leadership skills, where did you ever lead, right? It doesn't have to be you led a movement or your company head. No, you led your community, clean up your neighborhood. That's a leadership, right? You got up, you got people organized, and you made them do, at least you helped them do something. Define it clearly when you say leadership. A collection of words doesn't make you proficient leader or communicator because you put it in there. Show me when you say communicator, talk about where you gave a speech or how you did communication. What aspect of your life and that experience makes you a good communicator? So don't write words for sake of listing them, right? Because it seems like somebody wrote it, everybody copies those and put it in there. If you said, I have a Microsoft skill, what are they? Are you good at Excel? Are you good at SPSS? What are you good at? Tell me. And then I need to see those being applied somewhere in your CV, right? So if you said, I'm good analyst, and you said, I use Excel, what is that program that you've done that uses Excel? Then I could compare the students like, yeah, this person knows Excel, right? But just because you say Excel, Word, and this and that, it doesn't mean you've done it. You just listed stuff. So it has to be short, clear, very, very sequential, right? So tell every time. If there's a gap, I've seen resumes that are 2 years, a year gap in them. But what I like people tell you is that in their story, they tell you why those gaps existed. Then I know there's nothing to be ashamed of being out of school for a year and did something else, right? I helped my family because my mom was sick. I took time off. So that happened to me, right? When I was in school, right after, I about to graduate from university, my mom got sick, and I was like, I had to be committed to work and support her family. So there was a gap, a year in I told that story, right? There was a gap, and I had to help family member in Ethiopia, right? And when people ask me, what is it? Then I define, and they're like very impressed that young age you did this stuff. It ends up being something people want to understand, right? So don't be embarrassed. Don't hide it. Define it if it is a gap. Oh, and then list things that you have done in a sequence. Everything you said, skills, you must demonstrate your skills in your CV. Just don't write words that, if you're not a good communicator, so be it. Not all of us are good communicators. Not all of us are leaders. If you were a follower, define, I was a good team member. You say team player, what part of a team were you? What was your role, right? So that's where I think I encourage people to do is that make sure your CV reflects part of you and put it in a sequence. And in terms of academic achievement, nobody's interested about your GPA. Or really, I don't even know. A lot of Ethiopians write their GPA, their phone number, their age, whether they're married or not. In fact, those are in the US point of contention because people should not discriminate against you because of your marital status or your age. It doesn't matter. Talk about what is relevant information for what you're applying for. If they ask you, you could answer if you want, and you don't have to. But in your CV, talk about from this year to this year. Clear timeline, right? The timeline that makes sense. If there's a gap, specify why there's a gap, right? If it, my CV, if you saw it, says a year time off, right? For that year, say time off. It doesn't mean time off I was partying or something. Let them ask me. When I write any support letter, I talk about that time of what it was. So I think people need to be really thoughtful and intentional what they put in their CV, not copy it from you. You're my friend. I saw your CV. It looks so good. I put it in there. That's not what it should be. It should say everything you've done that is relevant to what you're applying for, and then be clear and concise and no spelling mistakes. I see one of the things I hate the most is that people do not take time. Forget the, misalignment of things and all that stuff. But when they misspell common words, it's a reflection about you, how thorough you are. In one sense, you say you're an analyst or you're a fantastic physician, differential diagnosis is your strengths. And then you're making mistakes that are really nonsense, right? So how these two are not consistent? So be intentional about what you do. Take the time because it is about you. Most people come out of the house in the morning looking so sharp. They take more time to make sure they look good in the morning than putting in their CV, which talks about a lot about themselves, right? So make sure you do those things. Be intentional, correct it, show your friends, people you trust will give you, their thought about it, and be willing to take, suggestion and recommendation as you're developing it.
Yeah, those are really great points. So someone has their great resume, great recommendation letter, and then their great statement of purpose. And there are so many schools they can apply to. The US has so many universities. How do you advise for an Ethiopian physician to choose which school to go to for their master's in public health or any master's or any grad school? Like, what are some important things they need to consider? What are some things that they need to know about the US and the US educational system so they choose the best? They not only choose, but also when they apply, because there's financial restrictions, very expensive to send out applications. So most of us can only send 3 to 5, and that is actually a lot. So how do they choose? And then once they've chosen, once they start getting acceptances, how do they also pick which schools to go to? Of course, scholarship, the amount of tuition funding they get is the most important factor. But besides those points, how should they select these schools?
Yeah. So I tend to be not to focus on the schools per se. A lot of people say, oh, I have to go to this top 5 schools, right? I'm not one of those people. The school you go to does not define the kind of person you become, right? So who does the work? How you become? Obviously, going to a good school, you might have exposure to the best research and so forth, right? But in today's age, it's not the library that has all the research. It is online, right? Everyone has published. If I want to read about something about a fantastic professor at MIT or Harvard, I don't have to go to Harvard Library anymore. I can access that individual's work at home, right? So if the knowledge that you're interested about, if that's what you're driving for, then don't focus too much about the school. Obviously, not to putting aside the quality of the school matters, but for our people, Ethiopians who apply to foreign schools, especially in the US, when you are at Johns Hopkins, you know how hard it is to get into Johns Hopkins. But the challenge is that there were thousands and thousands of applicants from all over the world to apply there. You have to have unique, exceptional qualities for you to be considered even, right? So you could apply there 3 times in a row and not make it. But you could go down the street at Baltimore University and get the same MPH degree, right? At the end, if you're good, you'll end up around the same place. Yeah, and I really, really believe, at the end, we all average at the same place, right? So it is what kind of work you do, wherever it is, your effort that matters. So instead of what I say is wasting your time to get into the top 3 schools, apply. Apply to the top tier schools, apply to middle tier schools, apply to the bottom schools, right? And then this is what I used to tell students. Create an Excel spreadsheet, put your schools, rank them, right? So if you put Johns Hopkins number 1, I want to go there. Johns Hopkins says no to you. It does not matter anymore. Number 2 becomes number 1, right? So all the way to the bottom, whoever accepts you is your number 1 school. You have to think of it that way, right? Is it settling for whatever best? Yes, because that's what you got in. Instead of worrying about, I didn't get in there, I applied, they don't accept me, this is what I lacked. No, every school has a reason why they accept certain people. Sometimes they have quotas, right? So when I was in my school, when I was in admission committee, every year the GPA changed, right? The year I got in, it was 3.4 to even considered. The next year, it went to 3.8. But on the application and the school announcement, it says 3.0, right, to be considered. But what they see is the applicant pool. If we have a lot of applicants with the higher GPA, so we have to move up our GPA to get to the average number that is in there. So if you have a 3 and you wonder why you didn't get in, because most of the people had a 3, 4 or higher. So you need to say, is the best strategy to apply to all schools. Have it, if you apply to 10 schools, and number 1 and number 10, all the way to whoever accepts you. If you have multiple acceptance, then you can make consideration. So be systematic about it and ask other questions. The other questions are really, especially in the US, where is that school and what community does it exist in? How accessible it is to employment opportunities, right? If you do master's degree, there are opportunities you can work up to 24 hours. But if you are in the middle of nowhere, where you have no car, you can't work, you're stuck, right? But it would be better to be in a city and where you can work, support yourself and cover some of your tuition, whatever, right? So be systematic, study the where it is and understand what kind of state it is. If you have relatives nearby, that's the best place, because at the end, you're going to miss home. You're going to miss people who look like you, speak your language. So be thoughtful about it. Don't just go in the middle of nowhere. I'm telling you from personal experience, as a young kid, I ended up in Utah where no one looked like me. It was some of the hardest times I ever spent. Not because people were mean or obviously there's racism and all this stuff, but the loneliness destroys you. So you need to be very careful, and then you have to be able to be willing to adapt the culture and get into it. So you need to start studying. You're going to their country, right? Study it. What is the community you go to? What is the closest Ethiopian community nearby? What kind of involvement could I get in? And then don't go there and then be among Ethiopians all the time. You need to assimilate. You need to learn the culture, be a part of it. So think all of these things, but way ahead in advance, start seeing, do they give a scholarship? What kind of funding do they have? What are the resources for those schools, right? Some schools, as you know, are state schools where they're forced or at least obliged to give some scholarship. But in terms of scholarship, most of the time, either top, very, very well-known state schools or private schools are better, because private schools have this funds, right? Most of my undergrad education was funded by alumni from the school, right? So this is why I still contribute to my school alumni program. Even if it's $10 a year, I send it, because a collection of that helps a student who didn't have money, just like I needed. So think, ask, is the program as an alumni program where, past graduates are supporting it? Could you access that fund? That's where that personal statement, story writing makes you interesting, right? When you write those stories, making them feel why you need the money, people are more likely to be generous towards you. So you need to study the environment it is in, the kind of program they give in. Are you interested in the program? Now in age, you could ask students from LinkedIn, people who graduate from there, what they have done, especially recent graduates. Everybody puts their school. Ask them, I'm applying to this program. What was your experience? Just because you don't know them, they might answer. Ask 10 people. Even if one answers, that's some information you have, concrete information from someone who's been there, than going in blindly. So do your research. right? Be strategic about it and be willing to learn. And scholarships, as you know, Mika, is not a success. Nobody always, it used to be 100% scholarship. People don't give you 100%. When you get half, are you willing to take that half, right? Some schools, half scholarship is better than full scholarship elsewhere. So I would go into Johns Hopkins even if I get 50% in, as opposed to 100% in Tennessee University, right? So what is that your choice? Do you want to be in an environment where you could do what you're interested in doing, or you get 100% and be in an environment where there's no resources, you can't excel it? So be really, really thoughtful, have a conversation with people, ask. The only thing you could do in this environment is asking people who've been through the program and who've done. And for scholarship, there are immense number of sites where you could actually look into. And as Ethiopians, there are so many. There's like a friend of mine who got a scholarship because his grandfather went to Korea War. The Korean government gave him a scholarship. Who would think, right? So think about, be creative. What are the resources? And if you're a women applicant, there are minority women scholarships. Apply to it. People think, oh, I'm not going to get it. No, you didn't ask, right? It's better to be, I get the answer, oh, we don't have that money for you. They might give it, oh, we'll give you 5,000. That's 5,000 more than you would have had. So be strategic, apply, be systematic, list them, and write stories that makes you unique so that they can consider you for it.
Yeah, those are very great advices. You've touched everything, and how you say that we should apply first before we say they're not going to accept us. Have you tried first? Like, for example, I applied for a American Association University Women fellowship, and I actually got it. I didn't think I was going to get it when I did it, but I was like, I'm going to give it my best and I'll see how it goes. They actually gave me the fellowship. So unless you do it, there's no way of knowing if it's going to happen, and you have to give it 100% so you don't have regret. And so you're not also wasting your time. If you're doing it, you might as well give it 100% and see the outcome, right?
Yeah, one thing I would say is get out of this echo chamber that I hear in Ethiopia. They'll tell you, so-and-so applied, she never got it. 5 people applied, they didn't get it. But those 5 people have different story than you. You have to know, you try and not succeed than just because other people didn't succeed, I'm not going to. So, get out of that echo chamber, do your thing, and then learn, share your learning. And that's what you should do, is not just listen to other people and not do it,
Exactly. I know I've taken a lot of your time, so I'm just going to ask you one more question. And there is still a lot to dive into, but maybe we'll do like an episode 2 or something, because I know the time is going. So I'll ask you one more question. So seeing from an admission officer's perspective, or someone who's reading the applicant's side, what would you advise students, especially Ethiopian physicians? We've already talked about a lot of things. If there's anything that we've not covered, so what are universities looking for? What are admission officers looking for? What stands out for them? So how should applicants base gear themselves and just tweak their applications to feed into that person? Well, they're not lying, but how best can they show up and highlight their skills and experiences?
I think my single advice is show why you're unique, right? Because if you can find a way, right, what makes you a little bit different than the crowd, right? It is not necessarily your GPA or what you have done, but tell a story that makes people look back again. Whoa, let me read that again. And that's all you need, right? What is that line that grab people, right? So when I wrote my statement, going to medical school, I was so broke. I only applied to 3 schools, right? Because I didn't have money. And all 3 schools I got accepted in. Not because it was like I was unique, but I told the story, as I told you earlier, that made me unique. And I kept that. And when they rated, they were like, wow, this kid, let's talk to him, right? So that's all I needed. I wanted to go there and tell my story. So interview matters. In most of the MPH programs, I know you don't have stories for, in the opportunity to interview. If they do give you an interview, take it. Never refuse to have an interview. In fact, one of the big advice I give students is that when you start thinking about a program, try to connect to a professor who's doing research in that university about something you're interested in. Attend their conferences, write them an email once or twice and say, I'm so interested about this topic. I've read your article on this journal about this topic. and I see that you're doing this research. I am trying to apply to your school next year. Do you have any advice for me? Guess what happens? I have had this opportunity when a kid from India wrote me this letter, and I was so surprised. She found me, and I'm like, wow, she knows a lot about me, right? It's because we're humans. We like somebody recognizing us. So I read through her, and I replied to her, and I said, you know what? We have a program, the funding that will get it. I will forward your email to that admission committee so that they can consider your stuff. Guess what? She showed up in a fall, and she's like, Dr. Gezmu. I'm like, yes. Oh, this is so and so. I'm like, how did you get it? She's like, you referred me to admission. She thought I actually selected her and put her in. For me, the fact that she's interested in the field made me think maybe another, a graduate resident a student who I can make work hard for me for a little bit of money, right? That's how I forwarded. But for her, this huge opportunity. So be strategic. Think about the school study select. Reach out to university professors. And there are a lot of Ethiopian professors everywhere. So many of them. Find out and tell them and say, when the African professors, whatever, find out and say, listen, I'm so interested about what you're doing. Is there any way you can help me, right? Or I'm interested, how do I apply to the school? One of my friends when we were working in Addis at McKinsey, she wrote this letter to a professor at Oxford. And the guy set appointment, had a conversation with, she was so impressed. He made sure, although she didn't have any money, she got in through funding. They have, the university funding. He advocated for her. They're not connected in any way. The only thing she did was she was proactive in asking the right questions. So what makes you unique is that don't just send application. Oh, I submitted all this application is full. So far is done. Cross your arm and wait for something. You can pray all you want. God will help you. I hope so. But what if the contingency, what is it? Go for it. Ask to the professors. When you help yourself is when God, I think, most likely to help you more, right? So I think what the people need to do is that never assume just because they submitted, they're guaranteed for anything, but to go still on the other hand, have conversation with people, alumni, professors, and anyone associated with the university that they can, say something about that. And if you are talking to me when I was there, and then I see your name in application, I'm like, oh yeah, that student wrote me a letter. Let's consider that. That's a way in, right? So make yourself unique, not only with your stories, but with the things that you do, that you're committed to be in that place.